There's an expression from the ancient text, the Bhagavad Gita. The mind can be your best friend or your worst enemy. The inner critic, that's that voice in your head. So that can also be our best friend or our worst enemy. Which one is it for you? So in today's Weekly Wisdom, episode number 2, we're going to explore the process of shifting that voice from self-sabotage to self-support, from foe to friend, or at least reducing the inner critic's hold on us. Now, to be successful, there are 3 aspects to be successful. There's the strategy, there's the story, and then there's the state. And of all of these 3, so strategy, story, state, of these 3, which one do you think is the most important? Some people will say strategy, and I understand why. It's like, yeah, you need to know what you need to do. But actually, state is one of the most important of those 2, because it determines how you act in that moment, especially when it really matters. So for example, if you were in an interview, or you were having a difficult conversation with a customer, a work colleague, or even your boss, you have to manage your emotions in that moment. You have to manage your state in that moment. So to be successful, we need to manage our emotions, manage our state. But what happens? The inner critic comes along and it has a bad habit of screwing us up. So let's look at what is the inner critic, and then I'm going to give you 2 or 3 examples of the inner critic, and then we're going to look at 5 steps that we can use to help reduce the impact, the negative impact of the inner critic. So let's look at, first of all, what is the inner critic? So our mind is made up of, you could almost say, 2 sections with a layer in between. So one aspect of our mind is the conscious mind, the one that we are very much aware of, and the one that on a day-to-day basis is like the one that's running, the one that we can hear. Then there is the subconscious mind, which is, if you take like an iceberg, it's the layer underneath the level of the ocean. And in that subconscious mind is contained all our programming. And that's running all in the background. And oftentimes we're not even consciously aware, hence why it's called the subconscious. Now, in between the conscious part of the mind and the unconscious part of the mind, there's what we call the critical layer. And this is where our inner critic lies. And this develops from the age of about 7 onwards. Psychologists say from the age of about 7 onwards, and it's fully formed at the age of around 14 or 15. Now, it serves a purpose, it serves a function, and a good function. When we're a child, there's no critical layer. And so what happens is anything people say to us, we just absorb it like a sponge. And gradually, like I said, from the age of 7 onwards, that critical layer starts to develop. It questions, it challenges what people say to us. Is this true or not? Is this true or false? Is this real or false? Like that. So it forms an important part of our mind, because otherwise anything we would just come in contact with could go straight into our subconscious and affect us. The problem comes when that critical layer becomes too harsh. And often that happens, I'm just going to explore a little bit, often that happens from our childhood. Not necessarily just our childhood, sometimes it can develop in adulthood as well, as in it can become harsher in adulthood as well, depending on our association or depending on what happens. But let me give the example first of childhood, because especially those who come from, for example, Asian backgrounds or migrant parents, you'll often find our parents were very harsh. And they would be harsh in order to motivate or control us. So parents often use this technique, you could almost say, to shout the hell out of their kids. And it often works, because by shouting, that's what gets their kids to do whatever it is the parent wants them to do. So I say, in terms of parenting, that's the easy way out. That's lazy parenting, because what's the cost to the child? And the cost to the child is what happens to that inner critic. Good parenting is actually to understand the psychology of your child and then work with it. So, for example, when my son was 6 years old, to motivate him, I would challenge him. So, for example, when we wanted to get him to put his pajamas on at night time, and you know how kids are, they always fight going to sleep. For FOMO, they have the fear of missing out. So then what we would do to motivate him to go upstairs and put on his pajamas is we'd challenge him and say, okay, you've got 10 seconds to get upstairs and start putting your pajamas on. 10, 9, 8, 7. And then as soon as we would do the countdown, he'd be rushing around like crazy. Oh my God, I have to get out of here as quickly as possible. So we wouldn't need to shout at him. We wouldn't need to be like, go get your pajamas on. So once you understand that person's psychology, you can use their psychology without destroying their self-esteem. And that's the key thing, because if we just shouted at him, you're such a whatever it is, to go and put his pajamas on. Yes, we would have motivated him to put his pajamas on, but at what cost? And this is the point. Parents do use harsh language. Sometimes it's been us that have been spoken to really harshly. Do this, do that. You're so difficult. One client even told me his mum would say, I wish you weren't born. You give me so much trouble. That's harsh. So what does that do? So to our self-esteem, like smashing our self-esteem. However, the parent does that to make the child submissive. And let's be honest, for young children especially, it does work. So have you ever been spoken to harshly like that? By your parents, by teachers, maybe by bullies at school? And what was the effect on your self-esteem? And what happens is gradually, that harsh inner critic develops. We absorb that tone, that the language that was used, the harsh language that was used, and now we start to talk to ourselves like that. We try to motivate ourselves in that way. Now, sometimes it works. Sometimes being that harsh on ourselves is necessary. So, for example, it might be some extreme circumstance, and I don't know, you really can't get yourself out of bed or something like that. And it's like you have to use really harsh words or criticize yourself to get yourself to even move. Let's say you're at the gym or you're running a race, and your brain is telling you, come on, let's quit. I can't do this anymore. So that time, sometimes using harsh language really works. One of the hardest men on the planet, David Goggins, he talks a lot about this, and he uses some really good techniques. Sometimes, especially when you hear him talk in podcasts and things, you'll hear him swear, and he'll use really tough language, like tough love. So yes, that does work, especially in moments where your brain is telling you to quit. But the point here is, why are we using it all the time? Because if we are using it all the time, if that inner critic is constantly with us, it's almost like somebody's poking us with a sharp object to make us move. Imagine being poked by this sharp object. Yes, okay, it gets us to move sometimes. But the point is, we don't use it all the time, because ultimately it can hurt us, and it can even leave scars to our self-esteem, to our emotional well-being. So in ordinary circumstances, we don't want to have a very harsh inner critic, because it's damaging to our self-esteem. And gradually, rather than being motivating, it can even leave you deflated. When there's something new or difficult, what does your inner critic say? Does it say stuff like, oh, you're so dumb, you're so stupid, why are you even bothering? Right? Have you heard some of these statements? Does your inner critic say things like that? So psychologists Jay Early and Bonnie Wise, they've identified 7 different types of inner critics that can develop. So I'm going to discuss 2 or 3 of them today, just to give you an idea, because I think it's more important for us to understand the process of how to deal with them. I could go through all 7. You may not have all 7. So I'm just going to give you a flavor, just so you understand an example or what it's like. But more importantly is, how do you deal with them? Because if those inner critics rule your mind, they will rob you of your success. They have the power to negatively shift your state in a moment. Like I was saying in an interview, you may have prepared really nicely a job interview. You may have got your story straight. It's like, yeah, I'm going to get this. You've done your manifestation. You've seen yourself be successful. Then in the moment, just as you're walking into the interview room, the inner critic comes up. You're going to fail. Or there's 3 people in this panel. Oh my God, what are you going to do? And all of a sudden, it affects your state. It shifts your positive state that was there maybe just before you walked in. All of a sudden, it shifts that state into a very negative state. And that could influence your interview mood, your technique. And I often say this to clients, is that your mood in an interview is what determines your success. Sometimes even more than the words that you use, it's actually your energy, the energy that you're radiating in that moment. So it's very important that we get a handle of this inner critic. So let's look at, like I said, 2 or 3 different types of inner critic. Let's start with the perfectionist. Now this can have a very harsh voice, and it demands perfection. It demands flawlessness to avoid judgment. Now I'll say this about all the inner critics, is that actually when we analyze them properly, we'll see that they have a positive intention behind them. They're not actually there just to pull us down. We've spoken about this before in episode 1. The brain is designed not for success. The brain is designed for safety. So sometimes the inner critic will talk to you in that way in order to so-called protect us. And so we have to recognize the positive intention behind it. So the perfectionist, it wants to help us to avoid judgment. And it often drives us to follow unsustainably high standards. It pushes us to the highest level of performance. And that can often lead to anxiety. It can often lead to then burnout. And eventually it leads to procrastination, because obviously when your energy crashes, then naturally you don't want to move. So this is like cycling our state from hypertension, like so overly alert, like constantly alert, to then hypotension, where it's like you're procrastinating, doom scrolling, just lying in bed, can't even get out of bed to have a shower, and we kind of cycle between those two when there's the perfectionist there. And one of the main issues is the perfectionists associates high performance with safety and self-worth. So naturally we want those things. We want safety, we want self-worth, and that voice, that perfectionist voice that's so harsh, keeps drumming at us to achieve higher and higher and higher standards. It's trying to get us to, it thinks it's taking us to safety. It thinks it's working on our self-worth. I have one client, and he, as a kid, he was constantly criticized at home. So he was criticized by his parents, criticized by his siblings, and then at school he was criticized by bullies. And one of the reasons why is he is slightly autistic. So even the teachers would criticize him. Like, why can't you understand? Are you that stupid? So as a result of that, his inner critic became very harsh, because he was constantly put down. His inner critic became the perfectionist. And as a result, what happens is he has very high standards on himself. And the problem is, what we've noticed, what we've identified, is that even if he does somehow manage to achieve that high standard, there's no enjoyment, there's no pleasure from it, because when it's such a high standard and it's expected, then even when he achieved that high standard, it's like, well, that's what you were supposed to do anyway. There's no, like, I would tell him, like, wow, that's amazing, you achieved this and you achieved that, and I would be more excited than him, and he would just be like, okay, Nij, yeah. I was like, aren't you experiencing any pleasure from this? Aren't you experiencing any emotion from this? And he would say no. So this is one of the problems of the perfectionist. Its intention is righteous, but its impact is harmful. And one of the key problems of the perfectionist inner critic is, especially after we make a mistake, it comes down on us like a ton of bricks. Like, you always mess things up. You should have known better. This proves you're a failure. So when these phrases are told to us, maybe we heard these as a child, maybe we hear this even as an adult, or we heard other adults say this to themselves, and then we learned that. So indirectly, those things were being told to us, and our inner critic, the perfectionist inner critic, then developed. And now that inner critic says those things to us. It's like that person who said those things still lives rent-free in our heads, and it's almost like sitting next to us and bashing our ego, attacking our ego, constantly putting us down. So what we want, actually, is we want progress, not perfection. So one of the things that we're going to see later is we're going to reduce that perfectionist mentality. And the last thing I'll say just about the perfectionist is it's very much fear-driven. It's the fear of being judged by others, the fear of being criticized or rejected by others. So again, it has a positive intention. It's trying to stop us from being in a situation where others will judge us or criticize us or reject us, at work, at home, wherever it is. So we want to acknowledge that first. We do want to recognize, yes, my dear perfectionist inner critic, yes, I know you're trying to protect me, but no. And we'll see what to do more later. The second inner critic that I wanted to discuss is the underminer. Now this works alongside our brain. Whenever we want to do something new or different, the brain kicks in and it's trying to protect us from failure. It's trying to protect us from getting rejection or experiencing emotional pain. So what it does is it sabotages our efforts. And the way it does this, the sneaky way in which it does this, is by lowering your self-esteem. It keeps you small, and in that way it thinks it's keeping you safe. And this often manifests as self-doubt. It focuses on your your perceived unworthiness, and it's saying to you, why bother? You can't do this. You've never done this before. You're too small. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. And it says all these negative things in order to shut you down, to stop you from taking action. Maybe you're in a meeting, and it's an important meeting, your manager's there, or some customers there, and you want to make a good impression. And then what happens is, you get that good idea, you get that great idea, and you want to even speak up. But the inner critic comes up and says, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. What if they judge what you have to say? What if they criticize you? What if it makes you seem stupid? And so these kind of things come along. The underminer undermines us, lowers our self-esteem. So then we don't take action. We don't do the thing that could, I don't know, get us recognized, get us a promotion, whatever success, whatever goal it is that we're trying to achieve. It's like I was saying, it says things like, why bother? You're too small. And it's like a constant doubt in your head. And the positive intention from that, remember, is it wants to keep us, it wants to protect us from emotional pain, it wants to protect us from rejection, and protect us from failing. So it has a good intention, but again, my dear underminer, I understand your good intention. I know you're trying to protect me from being hurt, but I need to do this. So imagine in that meeting, in that with the manager there or the customer there, and the underminer comes up and says, no, don't say it. And you're like, thank you, I understand the protection that you're trying to give me here, but I need to say this because it's too good of an idea to miss. And then you speak up, and you speak up confidently. And who knows what happens as a result. Well, it may not be that you get promotion, but you'll get recognized. So that's the perfectionist, the underminer, and then there is another one called the controller. This one actually, you can look this up. There's 5 other different types of inner critic, but like I said, I want to focus more on what do we do about these. So you've got some idea. When you do this first step, one thing I want you to do is to understand which type of inner critic it is, and see these inner critics as people. See them almost as manifestations of your subconscious mind. I'm quite a visual person, so when I do use techniques, I often use them visually. So what I'll do is, for my inner critic, I'll almost see that inner critic as a person, that specific one. So let me give you an example. When I was with a client one time, and we were supposed to finish at a certain time, and I had a garage appointment. I had to take the car to the garage, and they were closing at a certain time. So the session ran over slightly, because I always try my best. I work hard to give the client the best result. So I ran over for about 15 minutes, jumped into the car, and then I started to drive to the garage. Now the problem is, it was the school rush hour time, and I'd forgotten to take this into consideration. And it's quite a long distance to the garage. So the whole time I was driving there, the inner critic was absolutely beating me up. Why did you spend a bit longer? Oh my God, we're going to be late now. Now what happens when you get to the garage and it's closed and you've wasted all this time? And it was just, you need to give the car in because there's an emergency. We need to fix this problem with the car and all this. And it was just bashing that pretty much the whole drive, in traffic as well. The inner critic was just bashing me. Then at one point I caught it, and I used a visual technique where I took that inner critic out and I made him sit next to me in the car. And I recognized that this inner critic was, beating me up effectively. It was just this constant, it's like a passenger in the car. Have you ever sat in a car with somebody who also knows how to drive, and they're just constantly like, oh, you should have braked quicker here, oh, you just ran through a red light, and there's constant like a commentary going on. So it was like this it was just constantly beating me up. And then I recognized it, and I turned to that inner critic. So because I do things visually, I actually turned to that inner critic sitting in the passenger seat next to me, and I told him, it's okay, we're going to make it on time. And even if we don't make it on time, what's the worst that can happen? Means I'll just have to take the car to the garage the next morning. I'll just rearrange. And I understood that the inner critic's trying to protect me from the criticism of the mechanic. So I was thinking, what's the worst the mechanic's going to say? He's going to say, either he's not going to be there, so nobody's going to say anything anyway, or he's just going to say, we're running a bit late today. If you could bring the car back tomorrow. That's it. What's the worst that could actually happen in this situation? He's not going to sit there and criticize and beat me up, or be like a bully, or be like maybe our parents were and just, bash it, beat you, like physically beat you because you were late to the garage. But that inner critic thinks it's like frozen in time. Maybe in the past you were beaten up by the bully. Maybe in the past you were beaten up by your parents, like physically. Maybe some harm did come to you in the past. But the point is harm going to come to me now? No. And so the first step so I'm going to give you 5 R's of how to overcome the inner critic. And the first step is to recognize. So catch the inner critic in action. Right? Catch the words it uses, the phrases, the tone. And one thing that I feel is really important, I tell clients to do this and then we analyze later, is to actually write down what those phrases are. And sometimes they will surprise you. It's like, whoa, I say this to myself? Because oftentimes, because you've been doing it for so many years, you don't even realize how harsh those phrases are. You don't even realize the effect it's having, the negative impact it's having on you. And of course, if you write them down, it makes it easier to reflect. And so step number 2 is then to reflect. So step number 1 is recognize that, be aware, be conscious of the inner critic and what it's saying, write them down. And then the second step is to reflect. And look at some of these phrases and words that you're using and notice if they sound like somebody, either from your past or somebody in the present. Notice the tone in which that inner critic is speaking to you. Who is that? Is it your inner critic, or is it actually somebody else who's living rent-free in your head? And even if they're not, shall we say, verbally abusing you currently in your life, they're still living rent-free. They're still being an abuser inside of you, and day after day after day after day. So then the third step, actually this is part of the reflecting, you can say part B of reflecting, is then rate each of those phrases. So take each phrase and rate them 0 to 5. And 0 being having the least effect on you, the least impact, and 5 having the most deeply impact on you. So whether it's hurtful, whether it makes you feel shame, whether it makes you feel angry. So rate each phrase according to how it makes you feel, 0 to 5. And you'll notice maybe there's some phrases like, oh, you're so silly. So that might be a 1. But then there might be others which are like, you're so stupid, you're such an idiot, especially name calling. Getting labels like you're a donkey, or some other phrase to that effect. The point is, what effect does it have on you? What emotion does that bring up? And then you can rate it. So for example, something like that, you're a donkey. So that for me would be a 5. And then how does that make you feel? And it makes you feel so low. It really impacts your self-esteem. And just notice that. And understanding what effect it has, what negative effect it has on us is important. Because when we associate pain with that phrase, that will start to help us reject, which is step number 3. That'll help us to start to reject that phrase. No, I don't accept that. I'm not a donkey. I'm a human. I'm not an idiot. I'm not stupid. There's so many aspects of my life where I'm so clever. So first thing is you've got to rate them. So recognize what the phrases are, then reflect on them and rate them 0 to 5, what negative impact has, and especially those that have a very negative impact, now you're going to reject them. Because I think this is important to say this, because thoughts are not facts. You are not your thoughts. Right? For some people, they're like, oh, you're not your mind. What? Yes, your mind is a part of you, but you aren't your mind. You'll notice you can become the observer of your mind, the observer of your thoughts, which means who are you? It means you're somebody separate. Now, the mind is a part of you, yes, but it's not actually you. You can choose to reject your thoughts if you want to. And that's important. When I learned that, I was like, oh, wow. And it transformed my life. It transformed my inner critic from being so harsh, because I started to reject the thoughts that it was saying. I started to challenge those thoughts. I started to challenge the intention of the inner critic. And gradually I've noticed now the inner critic has reduced inside. It's still important to have the inner critic, because you don't just want to listen to, you don't just want to, from the environment, just take in anything that happens. We still need to have that critical layer, but not so harsh, not so protective that it stops you from taking action. And especially if that inner critic puts us in a negative state, it feels like it's attacking us, and all those negative emotions come up. That's not a good state. So for example, when I was driving to the garage and I had that inner critic constantly bashing me, it's like if we take our emotional cup, and it's like every time it would bash me, it was like a little bit of anger went in there, and every time it would bash me, it's a little bit, and that anger towards myself. And so I was almost like winding myself up. I was getting into a frenzy even before I got to the garage. And this could be one of the reasons why road rage happens. You know, somebody's in traffic and they're just like, I need to get home, I need to do this, I need to do that. And they're just winding themselves up, and then somebody cuts them up in traffic and they just blow a fit, because their emotional cup is now being filled with anger. Like that. So it's very important to get a grip of our inner critic. Yes, I understand there's a positive intention here, but I reject these thoughts. I challenge these thoughts. So after rejecting or challenging, then the next step, the fourth step, is then to reframe these phrases. Reframe what this inner critic is telling you. So you look at the same situation, but look at it from a compassionate perspective. So for example, the perfectionist may come down on us like a ton of bricks when we make a mistake. You know, why are you so late going to the garage? So yes, I made a mistake, possibly, maybe made a mistake, and you can learn from it. You make the point that this doesn't define you. This mistake doesn't define you. And one key aspect is, what can you do to make things better? What can you do to be better prepared for next time? For me, when I was being bashed by this inner critic for being late, I actually went back to my values. And my priority is to help clients, help serving the client, help leave them in a good state, help make a difference to that client's day. And I did that. And so when I refocus on that, hang on. I know you're bashing me because I'm late going to the garage, but look at how happy that client was. Look at what a difference I've made to that person. So, okay, if it means that I have to bring the car back the next day, so be it. It was worth it. And so when I challenged the inner critic, gradually it started to calm down. So reframe what that inner critic is saying. Reframe that situation. Look at it from a different perspective. Look at it from your values. What's important to you? Yes, you might be in a situation that is outside of your control because of your value. Well, that's what you value. One coach made this point. It's really nice. So some people have a hard time looking in the mirror as they're getting older. You know, some wrinkles are there or grey hairs are there. And she made this point that one of her best friends died at the age of 37. And at the age of 37, she didn't have any wrinkles. So when this coach, when she looks at herself in the mirror and she sees wrinkles, she's reframed the negative thinking or the inner critic. Oh my God, you're getting old, or whatever negative statements the inner critic makes. She's reframed it to, you know what? I get to live another. This wrinkle, this grey hair shows that I got to live another day. I got to live another year. I get to grow old. Because her 37-year-old friend is not going to get to see her kids get married, not going to see them, graduate, get their job, etc., etc. And I thought, wow, that's such a beautiful reframe to look at something which the inner critic could use to bash us. We then use it to reframe it. So this is powerful. Now, one thing I'll say about reframe, it's probably one of the things that I do the most with clients, because when there is a lot of negative emotions driving that inner critic, sometimes we can't even think of reframing. It's like if we wear colored glasses. Let's see if I've got some glasses, some different. Sorry, I wear these are the blue light glasses. But if you wear a different set of glasses, then it can. So when we wear some kind of colored glasses, like colored, by colored I mean colored by negative emotions, it then it then filters what it is that we see. And so sometimes it's very hard to reframe that particular situation when there's a lot of negative emotion, so-called negative emotions. So one of the things I do with clients is, first of all, we reduce those emotions, and then from a position, from a more, shall we say, neutral position, you're able to do the reframe. So what I'll say is, if you are having difficulty reframing, if you are having difficulty with the inner critic, get in touch, and you'll find how to get in touch with me in the description below or the comments below. So what have we got so far? We've got recognize, so become aware of those thoughts, write them down, reflect on those thoughts, reflect and rate those thoughts, 0 to 5, and what's the impact it's having on you. Then reject them, especially any ones that are like 3, 4, or 5, if they're having a negative impact. Reject those thoughts, reframe those thoughts, and then finally we're going to say reset. So recognize, reflect, reject, reframe, and then finally reset. Now this reset is about us. It's about repositioning how we look at ourselves, how we view ourselves. So when you look at yourself from a more powerful and more accepting position, that puts you into back in the driving seat of your life, rather than the inner critic, as a passenger in the car going like this and influencing your state. When you reset, you reposition yourself. Who are you? You're not a failure. Who are you? You're human. To err is human. You are going to make mistakes. We're not perfect. It's normal to make mistakes. The point is we learn from it. So it's not that we're a failure, it's that we're human. It's not that you're not good enough. Who are you? You're enough. You're an achiever. You're a winner. Now, you're not necessarily a winner just because you achieved a goal. You're a winner because you keep getting back up. You keep going. That's the point. Now, interestingly, there was a time where you couldn't walk. And when you fell down, when you would try to get up, when you would try to walk, you would fall down. And every time you fell, you kept getting back up. You kept trying again. You take a few steps, fall, and get up again. Take a few steps, fall, and get up again. So if you can walk, you are a winner, because you fell and you got back up. So when we reset our position, when we reset our identity like that, from failure to winner, you are a winner. If you can walk, you're a winner. and start to see yourself in that light, reposition yourself in that way. That allows us then to overcome the, shall we say, the negative effects, the past negative effects of the inner critic. And remember, how you talk to yourself influences your state, your mood, your self-esteem. And that's important in the moment, in a critical time, in a time where what you do will make an impact on your life, will make an impact on your success or not. That's important. So turn off the autopilot and take control of the steering wheel when your mind is going off course. And that's the key point, because that inner critic has been beating us up for so many years. Some of us don't even recognize its impact, its negative impact, how it's stealing our success. So it's time to switch off the autopilot and recognize. Let's go through them. Maybe you can say in the chat what the 5 steps are. So recognize, and you'll notice I've been repeating them because by repetition it helps us to remember. So recognize. What's the next one? Somebody help me out here in the chat. Recognize, reflect and rate, reject, and then reframe. So especially the ones that we rated like 3, 4, or 5. And then the last thing is reset. Reset your identity, reset your position, reset who you think you are. That's really important. So if we don't tame these inner critics, they can ruin our day, maybe even ruin your life, especially in those certain decisions. They can get you to get into a frenzy. So imagine that inner critic is a person sitting beside you. Would you let that person talk to you like that? If it was an actual person, we're all generally we're adults now, or in adulthood. If there was a person who was sat there and just kept constantly criticizing, what would you say to that person? You wouldn't just let them do that anymore. And the problem is, if we don't recognize it's doing it, so that's one of the reasons why we use distractions and we just doom scroll, because there's this abusive, wounding part of the mind. So what we want to do now is to address that abusive, wounding part and now begin to reduce its negative impact. So there are times where you might need the perfectionist, there are times where you might need the underminer and the other 5 inner critics, but we want to reduce their effects. They shouldn't be there all of the time. And we want to learn to make them into our friends. So in this way, we make the mind our best friend rather than our worst enemy. And I'll just finish. So if you have any questions, by the way, please write them in the chat while I tell this last story. I just want to tell one last story, one interesting story, which again helped me to, it pushed me actually to work on my inner critic. And this is a story, obviously it's a metaphorical story. It's a story of some frogs. And they had gathered at the bottom of this very tall tower. And that day there was a competition that who could be the fastest to reach the top of that tall tower. So the best of the frogs, they had come there and they had begun to climb up, and there was a massive audience. The rest of the frogs were there and they're all shouting, screaming, "Come on, you can do this!" And they were all encouraging initially. And then the frogs were coming up, and gradually they noticed so many frogs just became tired, and one frog fell and fell to its death. And when the audience saw this, they turned back up to the other frogs and were like, "Oh my God, come back down. It's too dangerous. Wait, come back down. So then by this constant shouting, so many of the frogs who were in the competition heard this. "Oh my God, it's so unsafe. You might fall. If you get tired and you let go, you might fall. You might die." So on hearing this, many of the frogs began to come back down. And gradually, there was only like three or four of these frogs left. And the constant criticism, the constant fear that the audience, the spectators, their harsh words were saying, gradually every single one of those frogs began to come down except one. And this frog just continued and continued and continued and continued, and finally it reached the top of the tower, and all the frogs went crazy. Oh my God, somebody did it, somebody did it. And then once it had reached the top, gradually it came back down again, and everybody surrounded it. And then they realized the frog was deaf. So it didn't listen. It didn't hear the negative talk of the inner critics. So thank you for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. If you want to get in touch, there's some links below. I have some online courses that help with these things, especially this topic of the 3 aspects of success. So strategy, story, and state. So today I've spoken about state. That particular course, so it's called the Success Breakthrough Workshops, an online course. It helps you to develop your story. All of them are needed. You need to have the right state, we need to have the right story, and we need to have the right strategy. So the strategy and the story is kind of included in that online course. So again, the links are below. And if you haven't signed up to my mailing list, so I'll let you know about different events that are happening. I am planning to do a live event specifically to help you deal with the inner critic, reframing, and these 5 steps that we spoke about. We're going to do it in a live in-person workshop. So look out for those details. So if you go to my website and events page on my website, if you sign up there, you'll get all the information. And I'm also giving a free PDF, like a summary of what we discussed today, and all the weekly wisdoms that we're doing. You'll get a summary, like a 2-page, 3-page PDF, which kind of summarizes what we've discussed. So if you want access to that, the whole library, you can sign up to the on the events page. So www.nijday.com/events. The links will be below. So are there any questions? Oh yes, and next episode, we're going to be talking about from social anxiety to social confidence and charisma. So developing charisma, especially in social gatherings. It helps us to network, it helps us connect with other people. So many people tell me that they're introverts. Many of my clients are introverts, and they're like, they don't have this social confidence. They sit there. Of course, that's why one of the things is obviously the inner critic. We need to address that. But then another aspect is actually developing social confidence, even if it's to meet somebody. I know you're going on a date or something like that. You want to give the best version of yourself. Having some social confidence, having some charisma is important. Even at work, you want to go up the ladder. Definitely networking and having social confidence makes a difference. So yes, please join me for that. So that'll be on Monday, I think it's the 9th of February 2026. If you're watching this later, you can watch the recording. It'll be somewhere up here. Okay, so I'll just read through some of these comments. Thank you for these. Our greatest lessons in life come from the mistakes and defeats. Wonderful point. That's such a good reframe. So when we go through failures and we look at it like that, our greatest lessons came from these failures. How do you then see or perceive that failure? It's not something negative. That's a brilliant reframe. Thank you. Being able to reflect, evaluate, reassess, and learn from these situations is part of continuous improvement. Absolutely. Reflect. The inner critic looks at a circumstance or situation through one lens. Yes, exactly. It only looks through that one lens. And that's why we have to switch off autopilot. Because on autopilot, we just listen to that one perspective. And that's not a good perspective. By switching off autopilot and then going through this process, recognizing, and then let's go through it again. So could somebody write in the comments? So recognize, reflect, then and rate, then reject, and then reframe, and then finally reset. So that 5-step process is switching off autopilot and then us taking control of the steering wheel. And when the mind is going off course and blah 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 blah, the inner critic is just ranting, then we steer our life back onto course. We gain control of our state again. And like, for example, yes, this brilliant reframe of, some of my best lessons in life from my mistakes. Great. So it's okay to make mistakes. That's one of my best lessons. That's where I get my lessons from. Come on, let's do the next thing that's outside of my comfort zone. And if I make a mistake, yeah, I'll learn from it. Brilliant. Doesn't that give you so much more motivation compared to you are a failure, you are a failure, you are a failure? The inner critic just saying that you're a failure. No, that's completely demoralizing, completely deflating our self-esteem, deflating our confidence. So exactly. So which one do we want? Switch off the autopilot, take control of your state, and then act in that moment. It's you radiate so much more positive energy when you take control of your state, when you decide your state, rather than letting the inner critic decide your state and keeping you small. So yes, make the mind our best friend, not worst enemy. Okay, are there any questions? If not, we will end it there. Thank you very much, and hope to see you in the next one.